Somewhere in a harbour in Hamburg, a crane the height of a 20-story building is lifting a prefabricated bridge section that weighs more than 200 tons. It moves slowly, precisely, without hesitation. The machine doing this costs more than 3 million euros. It was designed in Germany, built in Germany, and shipped to every major port on Earth. The company that made it generates over 14 billion euros in revenue every single year. It employs 54,000 people across 50 countries. It builds cranes, aircraft components, refrigerators, mining trucks, and 6 luxury hotels, and it has never, not once, sold a single share on a public stock market. This is Liebherr, and this is the story of a family that built one of the largest industrial empires in history, and then refused to let anyone else in. Here is something that should not be possible. At a certain size, every company goes public. That is the accepted logic of modern capitalism. You grow, you need capital, and capital requires shareholders. Volkswagen is public, Siemens is public, Caterpillar, Liebherr's closest American competitor, is public. Every company at this scale has answered to a stock market, a board of investors, a quarterly earnings call. Liebherr has answered to none of them. The company founded in 1949 by a German master builder in a small wooden shed is today, 75 years later, still 100% owned by the Liebherr family. No outside investors, no IPO, no ticker symbol, just a family, a name, and an empire built crane by crane. The question is, how? And more importantly, why? Hans Liebherr was born in 1915 in Kirchdorf an der Iller, a small town in the south of Germany beside a river. He was 2 years old when his father died in the First World War. At 13, he began an apprenticeship in his stepfather's construction business. By the time the Second World War started, Hans Liebherr was working in the German Army's engineering corps, specifically in units that built military bridges across rivers in Russia. He spent the war watching men struggle with equipment that was too heavy, too slow, and too difficult to move. He watched construction projects that should have taken days take weeks because the machinery wasn't designed for the problem in front of it. When the war ended, Germany lay in ruins. Entire cities had been bombed flat. The reconstruction effort was the largest building project in European history, and the tools to do it simply didn't exist at the scale needed. Conventional cranes were enormous, expensive, and took several days to assemble on site. Small construction firms couldn't afford them, and small construction firms were exactly who needed to rebuild Germany street by street. Hans Liebherr set up a small wooden shed and started building a solution. The TK-10, his first mobile tower crane, was unlike anything that existed. It could fold for transport, arrive on a single truck, and be assembled in 2 to 3 hours instead of several days. It extended from 4.5 to 16 meters and could lift up to 2,000 kilograms. It was affordable for smaller firms, and it was exactly what post-war Germany needed. He exhibited it at the Frankfurt Trade Fair in 1949. He received not one order. He built them anyway, and a few weeks later, the orders came. In his first year of business, Hans Liebherr sold 160 cranes and generated 2.2 million Deutsche Marks in sales. Within months, his shed had become a factory employing 110 people, building roughly 1 crane per day. Hans Liebherr did not stop at cranes. That was the pattern that would define the company for the next 75 years. Solve one problem completely, then move to the next one. In the early 1950s, he looked at excavators. The machines available were large, slow, and clumsy, driven by steel cables through pulleys, which was imprecise and limited in power. Liebherr spent 8 months developing a hydraulic excavator, using hydraulic pressure, the same technology used to tilt dump truck beds to drive the bucket. The result was lighter, faster, and far more capable than anything on the market. It became the second major product line of the Liebherr Group. Wind and Verpenthenden. Then came concrete mixers. Then, in the mid-1950s, something completely unexpected: household refrigerators. Liebherr's engineers had developed expertise in precision manufacturing and temperature control through their industrial work. The family saw an opportunity in a consumer market that was just beginning to grow in post-war Europe. New plants opened in Biberach, Kempten, and Ochsenhausen. By the end of the 1950s, Liebherr employed roughly 2,400 people and generated 77 million Deutsche Marks in annual sales. And crucially, every bit of that growth had been financed with the company's own money. No bank loans that would demand control. No investors who would demand a seat at the table. Hans Liebherr had a philosophy so simple, it sounded almost naive. Build well, keep the profit, reinvest it, own what you build. Never give away control for the convenience of outside capital. Through the 1960s and 1970s, Liebherr expanded internationally. A crane plant in Ireland in 1958, one of the first major German industrial investments in the country after the war. Mining equipment operations established in the United States in 1970, facilities across France, the UK, and beyond. By the end of the 1970s, the Liebherr Group employed 15,000 people in 10 countries and brought in over $1 billion in annual sales. Fortune magazine listed them at number 431 among the largest industrial companies outside the United States. Every competitor at that level was raising capital on public markets. Liebherr was not. The 1970s also brought aircraft. Liebherr's expertise in hydraulics led them into aerospace, designing and manufacturing nose-wheel systems and air conditioning modules for the European Airbus program. That business alone would eventually be worth hundreds of millions of euros annually. In 1983, Hans Liebherr restructured the company. A Swiss holding company, Liebherr International AG, was established in Bulle, Switzerland. The German operations were kept under a separate German holding. Ownership was distributed among his 5 children, but the fundamental rule remained unchanged. The family owns it, all of it, completely. Hans Liebherr died on the 7th of October 1993. He was 78 years old. He left behind 5 children, more than 20,000 employees, and a company generating over 4 billion euros in annual revenue. The question every family business faces at that moment: does it survive the founder? Most don't. The first generation builds it. The second generation argues about it. The third generation sells it. That is the standard story. The Liebherr family wrote a different one. His son Willy Liebherr and daughter Isolde Liebherr took over the Swiss operations. The remaining children managed the German holding. The decentralized structure Hans had built meant each division could be managed independently, but the ownership never changed. In 2023, the third generation stepped forward. Jan Liebherr, Hans's grandson, became president of the administrative board of Liebherr International AG. His cousin Stephanie Wohlfahrt became vice president. The revenue that year, 14 billion euros. The ownership, still 100% family. Most people who know the name Liebherr picture cranes, the enormous yellow machines on building sites and in harbors. And cranes are real. They account for roughly 1/3 of the company's revenue. 2/3 of 14 billion euros comes from places most people never think about. Aerospace. Liebherr manufactures landing gear systems, actuation systems, air management systems, components found on Airbus and Boeing aircraft flying passengers every day around the world. Mining. The Liebherr T2084 mining truck has a payload capacity of 363 tons. It is one of the largest trucks ever built. Refrigeration. The Liebherr fridge in a kitchen in Belgium or Switzerland or Austria was built by the same company that builds cranes for Hamburg Harbour. Gear cutting machines, maritime equipment, diesel engines, and 6 luxury hotels in Ireland, Austria, and Germany. Because when a family owns 14 billion euros in annual revenue and answers to no shareholders, they can invest the profit wherever they judge it makes sense. There is a version of this story where Hans Liebherr goes public in 1975, raises $500 million, expands faster, acquires competitors, becomes a household name globally. There is also a version where, 10 years later, the shareholders force a restructuring, where a private equity firm buys a controlling stake, where the engineering culture that built the TK10 in a wooden shed gets replaced by a quarterly earnings focus, where the family loses control of the name above the door. That version of the story happened to dozens of companies, brands built over generations, sold in a single boardroom decision. Liebherr chose differently. They chose slower. They chose harder. They chose to fund everything themselves, expand only when the money was there, and never, under any circumstances, hand over ownership for the convenience of outside capital. Liebherr, 75 years later, they build the biggest machines on Earth. They employ 54,000 people. They generate 14 billion euros a year. And every single share is still in the family. Hans Liebherr started in a wooden shed with a crane nobody wanted to buy. His grandchildren run one of the largest private industrial empires in the world, and they never needed to ask anyone's permission to do it.